Hi, it's Leslie Zemeckis back with another Write for Success. My guest this week is Christina Hammonds Reed, and I could not be more honored. Her book, The Black Kids, is an absolute must read. It's her debut novel, and she knocks it out of the park. Set in Los Angeles prior to, during, and after the Rodney King riots, it is a page turner. I not only recommend this for all of you, but every upper school needs to put this on their list of required reading. The book is a New York Times bestseller, a William C. Morris Award finalist. It is a story about Ashley, a senior at a mostly white high school far from the riots. A coming-of-age story. It is about race, place, class. The story asks, who is us and who is them? Christina uses beautiful language to tell this story. I hope we get many more books from her. This year's writers are sharing with us where the magic happens, their writing tips, and as Christina is sharing her research. As a writer myself of biographies and history, I love doing research, and a lot goes into creating a story. So here is Christina sharing, I'm sure, just some of her research for this incredible book, The Black Kids. I'll see you back here next week with another incredible storyteller. Keep reading, keep telling stories, because stories matter.
Hi everyone, hi Leslie. My name is Christina Hammonds Reed and I am the author of The Black Kids. For those of you who don't know, The Black Kids is considered historical fiction, YA. It takes place during the 1992 LA riots, and so it was a really fun opportunity for me to delve into 1992 and the events leading up to the riots and the context and just sort of what forces were at work in 1992 that are also kind of echoed and what we saw in 2020. So I was only 8 at the time, and this was really an opportunity for me to get to learn more about everything that was going on then in a way that I hadn't understood at the time. And one of the first books I read, because I love research, but this was actually a play. This is by Anna Deavere Smith, who some of you may know as an actress, but she's also an incredibly talented playwright. And this was a one-woman show she performed where she culled interviews from people all over LA, and it's just an incredible portrait of all different kinds of people, where they were mentally and emotionally and physically in response to the riots. And so you get everyone from a USC sorority student to Korean shopkeepers to Black people actually in South Central at the time, to the sort of flighty woman in Beverly Hills who's holed up in a hotel because she's afraid to go back to her house. And you really just get a sense of the broad spectrum of Los Angeles. I think so many people who aren't from here have these very polarized views of what LA is. And this book really brings together how the community as a whole was impacted by the riots. And it's also just really well written. So if you can get your hands on this, I highly suggest it. The next book I'd like to tell you a little bit about was this one. This is The Contested Murder of Latasha Harlins. For those of you who don't know, Latasha Harlins' death was actually a huge catalyst for what happened with the uprisings as well. Latasha Harlins was a 15-year-old Black teenager who was assumed to be stealing a bottle of orange juice. She wasn't, but the shopkeeper shot her in the back of the head as she was leaving the store, and ultimately was not brought to justice. It was essentially a slap on the wrist. And so it really brought to light the systemic racism in our justice system, and how Black life and Black youth and Black childhood is very vulnerable to these forces. And the fact that her killer really kind of got away with just a slap on the wrist was something that was part of the anger and frustration that built towards the riots in 1992. So another book that I thought was really interesting was this one, and this is about a radio station in Compton. KJLH was an independently owned Black radio station, and so, oh, you can see my ring light. Its coverage of the riots was an interesting space for community to gather, and specifically the Black community to gather. and Black and brown community, and to share their thoughts and their frustrations and their opinions on everything, both leading up to the riots and then just the destruction of the riots themselves, and what it was doing to communities. And it just was a space for dialogue, and I think it provided a space similar to how we use Twitter now, or Instagram or social media. The radio provided that at that time, and so people called in and vented and teared up and communed with each other, and tried to talk about rebuilding and working towards rebuilding. And it's just a really interesting portrait of how local radio, neighborhood radio, can facilitate dialogue and bring people together in that way. And so the most invaluable resource for me, probably over the course of writing this book, is this one. I don't even know if it's still in print. I bought it off of Amazon, and it's clearly a library book. But this one is called Understanding the Riots, and it's a compendium put together by the LA Times that includes riots both leading up to and, includes stories leading both up to and during and after the riots. And so you can kind of see all the tabs that I have here. It's just like page after page. It looks like almost every page I tabbed. But it gives a lot of context, and it's also just interesting to see how local news is covering it, and the echoes in some ways in terms of what we saw once again in 2020, in terms of how media spoke of the frustration over unequal policing, over how the justice system works or doesn't work. And we saw a lot of those conversations echoed more recently, and expanded upon. And I think it's kind of a measure of how far we've come, but also how far we still have to go. And if you are at all interested in just the historical context and the socio-political context of the LA riots, this is a really interesting read if you can get your hands on it. Maybe you too can find a library book that somebody is selling on Amazon. And the last resource that was a super fun and easy resource was YouTube. I spent hours on YouTube just watching amateur footage and watching clips from different stations that people had posted, and all kinds of music videos to get a sense of what teenagers were listening to at the time, to see fashions at the time, and to just really immerse myself in 1992. And I think that that's some of the fun of historical fiction. You just get to wholly immerse yourself in an era, and for me a lot of that was nostalgic because it harkens back to my youth. And I just think that's one of the joys of historical fiction, is getting to really research and live in another time for however many pages, and to also just see how the past impacts the present, and how the past can be used to hold a mirror up to the present. So I hope you enjoyed a little bit of my research process, and you can hopefully find some of that in The Black Kids if you've read it, and sort of read it with new eyes. So I thank you so much, Leslie, for having me, and thank you guys for watching.